I spent 30 years raising him, loving him, building a life around him. And on the most important day of his life, I wasn't seated among family. I was hidden behind a kitchen door next to a tray of shrimp cocktail. But that's not the worst part. Today, I'll tell you the real story. The secret that shattered everything. And the moment I chose myself over a lifetime of being invisible. Stay with me. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about reclaiming your power when the world tries to erase you. The scent of garlic and marinara clung to the air like a second skin. It curled around Evelyn's soft mauve chiffon dress, the one she had picked out carefully, hand-stitched at the waist, the color chosen to match the bridesmaids' blush-toned gowns, though no one had asked her to. She sat quietly on a metal folding chair tucked between a rusting cart with a wobbly wheel and a wall stained with years of kitchen steam. A single paper napkin lay across her seat when she arrived. No name card, no welcome. Just that. That was her place. Through the narrow crack of the swinging kitchen doors, Evelyn could see slivers of the reception. Golden lights strung across the ceiling shimmered softly, like stars hung just for the night. Laughter spilled in from the hall, full-bodied and careless. The sound of champagne glasses clinking, and people dancing to songs she'd once hummed to Liam when he was a baby. She strained her neck for a glimpse of the couple. There they were. Liam and Sophie, twirling under a chandelier, surrounded by everyone. Everyone but her. She had paid for that chandelier. She had paid for the flowers draped across the archway, for the velvet chairs lined up in perfect symmetry, for the 5-tier cake that sat atop a mirrored pedestal, glowing under spotlight. But no one had paid attention to her. Not when she walked in. Not when she stood by the bar waiting for someone to tell her where to sit. Not even Liam, her only child, the boy she'd raised on her own through fevers, braces, and panic attacks. He had smiled across the room, his face alight, cufflinks straightened, collar crisp. But he hadn't looked her way. When the young catering manager finally approached her, barely older than a college student, he looked embarrassed. They said you were to wait here, ma'am," he said, scratching the back of his neck. The bride didn't want, any visual clashing with the aesthetic. He winced. Photos and all that aesthetic. Evelyn had echoed her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, then turned away, relieved she hadn't caused a scene. She didn't. She sat down. The chair creaked. Her shoes polished nude pumps that pinched just a little too tight, stuck slightly to the linoleum floor where someone had spilled gravy earlier. She pressed her knees together, smoothed her skirt, and looked at her hands freshly manicured in a soft pink, the same shade she used to paint Liam's nursery. A waiter dropped a chipped plate in front of her, chicken congealed sauce a roll already growing hard around the edges. She didn't touch it. The door swung again. More music, more laughter. Someone was giving a toast. She couldn't make out the words, only the tone bright, warm, affectionate. A father, maybe. A friend. Not her. She clutched the small beige handbag that Liam had given her one Mother's Day back when he still called her Mama. Her fingers trembled a subtle vibration in her wrists. It felt like something was trying to escape her bones. Anger, grief, disbelief. She wasn't sure. When she looked at the program she'd been handed at the church, she scanned it for her name. Nothing. Sophie's parents were listed. Sophie's siblings. Evelyn wasn't mentioned once. The woman who raised the groom from diapers to adulthood had become an invisible guest at her own son's wedding. She had hoped naively that today would be a celebration for both of them. That maybe, just maybe, she'd be invited to speak or dance or simply sit with family. Instead, she was placed next to a tray of shrimp cocktails she had paid for. Outside that swinging kitchen door was the life she had built carefully, painfully for someone who had now chosen to leave her out of the picture. Literally. And still she smiled, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she had already learned the art of swallowing pain without making a sound. As she sat in that tiny chair with a paper napkin for a place card and cold chicken growing colder, Evelyn Carter began to realize she had spent a lifetime making space for others, and now they had decided she didn't belong at the table at all. But that night, Something deep inside her shifted, not loudly, not all at once, quietly, like a door slowly swinging shut. Long before Evelyn sat behind that swinging kitchen door, she had stood at the foot of a hospital bed in worn-out sneakers, clutching a cup of coffee she couldn't afford to waste. She'd worked the night shift as a nurse for almost 2 decades, long hours, low pay and constant exhaustion. The kind of tired that doesn't just live in your bones, but in your breath. Every step felt borrowed from tomorrow. Liam had been 5 when Evelyn first picked up a second job. He needed speech therapy. His R's came out like W's and other kids laughed. Insurance didn't cover it and the clinic wanted full payment up front, so she signed up for extra shifts at the county hospital. 12-hour overnights in the pediatric ward. She became the nurse who remembered which kids liked their apple juice with a straw, who read bedtime stories between rounds, and who nodded off in the break room with her head against a vending machine. And when morning came, she walked Liam to kindergarten, yawning into her scarf, as he skipped beside her. They lived in a 1-bedroom apartment back then. Evelyn gave Liam the bedroom. She slept on the pull-out couch, stuffing a rolled towel beneath the frame so it wouldn't collapse in the middle of the night. She used to listen to him snore softly through the paper-thin wall and think, as long as he's okay, I'm okay. He was 6 when he asked for a pair of light-up sneakers, red ones with Velcro and flashing soles. They were $32.99 at the local department store, an amount Evelyn didn't have, so she pawned her necklace, the only piece of jewelry she'd kept from her short-lived marriage. She told herself it was just a thing, a trinket. Not worth more than the look on Liam's face when he tore open the shoebox. He wore them every day until the light stopped working and the Velcro frayed. She never replaced the necklace. By the time he turned 8, Liam wanted to learn the piano. There was a music store near the bus stop with a chipped white baby grand in the window. He would press his face against the glass on the way home from school. One day Evelyn walked in and asked the owner if they offered lessons. They did $20 for 30 minutes, cash only. She found a part-time weekend position at a nursing home and budgeted every dollar. For 6 months, they ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner. She learned to cut corners with coupons and said no to every indulgence for herself. But Liam learned Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. By Christmas, by spring, he was playing Bach with 2 hands. She taped every recital. When he turned 16, he started applying for college programs. Evelyn cried in secret, overwhelmed and proud. He had become a tall, soft-spoken boy with kind eyes and a stubborn streak. He wanted to study architecture, said he liked making things that last. Evelyn remembered laughing quietly when he said that. You have no idea, she thought everything I've done was to build you. She sold her car to help him afford the deposit on his first semester, bought an old used sedan with no air conditioning, a driver's side window that didn't roll down, and a stubborn check engine light that refused to turn off. The radio only played AM stations, and she kept a plastic bag over the cracked back seat to keep it from leaking when it rained. But she never complained, because Liam was going somewhere, and if she had to walk barefoot on gravel to get him there, she would. He never knew all of it, not really. He thanked her with cards and hugs, made her macaroni art on Mother's Day, and said, "You're the best mom," when she packed his lunches, but time moves forward like a train that never stops, and Evelyn never asked him to look back. She didn't need gratitude. She just wanted a seat at the table. So when she was handed that cold chicken on a chipped plate and heard the muffled sound of laughter from the people she had helped gather in that golden room, something inside her cracked, not from the weight of sacrifice, but from the realization that none of it had ever been seen. Not the sleepless nights, not the second jobs, not the light-up shoes or the piano lessons or the rainy day drives in a wheezing sedan. None of it. They had looked through her, around her, past her, and yet for all the invisible things she had done, Evelyn Carter had built a life, a son, a future. She had made something that lasted. And now, maybe it was time to make something for herself. The program was printed on ivory cardstock with elegant gold lettering. Evelyn ran her fingers along the edges, half hoping despite everything that her name might be somewhere, anywhere. But it wasn't. Beneath the section labeled processional, there were Sophie's parents walking her down the aisle, then the officiant, then the bridal party, then the readings both given by Sophie's cousins, and then a simple line that read, "Liam and Sophie exchange vows beneath the floral arch surrounded by loved ones." Loved ones. Evelyn was not mentioned once. Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the program and tucked it into her purse. She reminded herself not to cry. Not here. Not now. She had paid for those programs. The reception hall buzzed with light and laughter, but Evelyn remained seated behind the door, watching fragments of the celebration, like a child with her face pressed against a candy shop window. Through the opening, she saw Liam laughing, his hand resting gently on Sophie's back. He looked older somehow, confident, polished like the man she had raised, except for the way he never looked her way. And Sophie with her perfect posture, her pearl drop earrings, her backless satin gown, was in full command of the room. At one point she glanced toward the kitchen. Their eyes met for a split second. Sophie smiled, not kindly, not sheepishly, but coolly. It was the kind of smile that didn't apologize. It confirmed what Evelyn had been trying to deny. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a logistical error or miscommunication. It was intentional. She wasn't welcome. The waitstaff passed her like she was part of the decor. No one offered her a drink. No one checked on her. She could hear the clatter of silverware, the burst of applause as Sophie's father finished his toast. A deep, booming voice cut through the air. "Here's to the new. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, may your life together be filled with joy and family. Family." Evelyn was sitting behind the garbage bins. She shifted in her chair and winced as a seam of her dress pulled too tight across her ribs. She had spent 3 hours getting ready that morning, hair-curled makeup applied with shaking hands. The dress steamed and pressed until it looked perfect. Because she believed foolishly that today would matter. She had bought that dress hoping to feel beautiful. Instead, she felt invisible. At some point, someone brought her a slice of cake on a plastic plate. It was vanilla with raspberry filling. Sophie's favorite, Evelyn took one bite and stopped. She didn't like raspberry. Never had. No one had asked her what kind of cake she wanted. Of course they hadn't. The band began playing the first notes of the mother-son dance, and for a moment Evelyn's heart lifted until she heard the announcement. Please welcome Sophie and her father to the dance floor. The music swelled. There would be no mother-son dance, that too had been cut. Her fingers gripped the napkin on her lap. The cheap plastic fork trembled in her hand. She pressed it down slowly, controlling the shake. She wouldn't let it show. Not now. Not in front of the kitchen staff who already looked at her with the awkward sympathy reserved for people who didn't belong. Evelyn heard a guest near the doorway whisper, "Isn't that his mom back there?" Another voice replied, "I thought she left." She hadn't. But maybe in some way she had. She was no longer part of the narrative, no longer needed in the photos, the toasts, the dances. She was the ghost, haunting the edges of someone else's celebration. She thought of all the stories she'd told Liam as a boy, of dragons and underdogs, and brave mothers who stood tall in the face of fire. Stories where the unseen became heroes, where love always found its way back. But life, it seemed, had a different script, and in this one she had been written out. Evelyn didn't touch the cake. She set the plastic plate on the edge of the tray beside her and folded her hands in her lap. Her palms were damp, her mouth was dry. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't devastated, but because the grief had calcified into something else, something denser. Sharper resolve. She reached into her purse with steady fingers, pulled out her phone and stepped further into the kitchen away from the swinging door. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The catering team bustled around her, shouting over trays of appetizers and wine glasses. But Evelyn stood still. She took a deep breath, opened her contacts, and made the first call. "Hi, this is Evelyn Carter. I need to cancel tomorrow's brunch floral delivery," she said. No issue, just a change of plans. Please, don't process the final balance." The florist stammered on the other end. Surprised Evelyn's voice never wavered. Next, she called the band's coordinator. "We won't be needing the second performance set tonight," she said, pausing as she listened to the confusion. "Yes, I'm sure." "Please consider the matter closed," one more the bar manager. "This is Evelyn Carter. Yes, I'm calling about the reception bar service. Please cancel the second shift. And the signature cocktails. No need for extended hours." She ended the final call with a quiet, "Thank you." Then she turned her phone off, not to avoid the fallout, but to let it come. She walked back to her chair, sat down and waited. It started small. At first, the band took a long break. Too long. People looked toward the stage, confused, fiddling with their champagne flutes. A few guests murmured, glanced at their watches. Then the DJ stepped up with an awkward smile and played a basic Spotify playlist from a laptop. The transition was rough. The volume too high, then too low. The energy dipped. Moments later, a waiter whispered something into Sophie's ear. Evelyn caught the tension ripple across her face as she turned to scan the room. The bar ran out of wine next. No refills, no cocktail napkins. Guests stood around clutching empty glasses. The signature drinks. Sophie's signature vision never appeared. Then came the flowers, or rather the absence of them. The grand display that was meant to adorn the brunch buffet table never arrived. An empty stretch of white tablecloth stared back at them. Sophie's mother spoke to the planner in a frantic hush, hands fluttering like anxious birds. The planner's face was blank, confused, helpless. Whispers turned into questions. Questions into murmurs. Murmurs into suspicion. The spell was breaking. In the far corner, Evelyn saw her niece Monica typing furiously on her phone, glancing toward the kitchen. Evelyn didn't flinch. She just sat quietly as the room she helped build began to unspool. She watched Sophie circle the dance floor, her smile beginning to crack. Liam followed behind her, rubbing the back of his neck, a tight crease formed between his brows. They didn't know yet, but they would. They would figure it out soon enough. Evelyn folded her napkin and placed it neatly beside her untouched plate. She straightened her back, brushed a hand along her dress, and stood. No one noticed her leave the kitchen. She passed the servers, the trays of half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, the busy bartenders trying to explain they weren't restocked for the night. She moved through the side hallway, the one marked "Staff Only." She stepped into the cool night air and inhaled deeply, the breeze a relief against the heat on her skin. A hush had settled over her mind like a snow-blanketed field after a storm. Inside the party limped forward, but the rhythm had changed. The cracks had formed. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was awake. Let them wonder. Let them panic. Let them explain to guests why the champagne ran dry, why the music sputtered, why the Sunday brunch would be just bagels and regret. Let them spin stories. She had hers. Evelyn walked back to her hotel heels in hand, her steps quiet against the pavement. She passed under street lamps that flickered, then steadied just like her. And as she reached her room, slipped off her dress and washed the last traces of the kitchen's grease from her hair. She looked in the mirror and said nothing at all. Because some revolutions don't start with a shout. They start with a whisper and a phone call. The hotel room was quiet, save for the low hum of the air conditioning and the faint buzz of Evelyn's phone vibrating on the nightstand. She didn't check it. She already knew what the messages would say. Demands for explanations, apologies painted in self-preservation, puzzled outrage from Sophie's family. Maybe even a voicemail from Liam. His voice caught somewhere between confusion and defense, but Evelyn didn't care. Not tonight. Instead, she opened her suitcase, pulled out her tablet, and reviewed the wedding budget one last time. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who had been balancing bills and blessings for decades. There were 2 charges she hadn't approved: an upgraded dinner at the rehearsal and a tasting at a downtown bar. She traced the card number. It was hers. She closed the app. Her breath was steady. her heart calm. And then, without quite knowing why, Evelyn found herself thinking about the red file folder at home, the one buried in the back of her dresser. She had kept it for years, not out of sentimentality but inertia. A drawer full of expired documents, insurance policies, old tax returns, and one envelope she had never opened. It was from Michael, her ex-husband. It had arrived weeks after his death. She had shoved it into the file without reading it, too raw, too angry, too tired to hear anything he had to say from beyond the grave. But now, something told her it was time. When she got home the next day, she didn't even take off her coat. She went straight to the bedroom, opened the drawer and pulled out the red folder. The envelope was yellowing at the edges. Michael's name written in that familiar slanted scrawl. She slid her finger beneath the seal. The letter inside was short. Evelyn. I know you never wanted to hear from me again, and I don't blame you. But I couldn't leave this world without telling you the truth, Liam. He's not biologically yours. I found out years ago. Sophie. His birth mother was pregnant when we got together. She asked me to raise him as mine. I told you he was ours, and you believed me. You raised him like your own. You loved him like your own. You deserve to know. Now I'm sorry for all of it. Michael. The room tilted slightly. Evelyn sat down on the edge of her bed, letter in hand, eyes locked on the words that shifted the foundation of her entire world. Not biologically yours. It repeated in her mind like an echo. Not yours, not yours, not yours. She didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because something else rose in her chest instead. Relief. The kind of relief that only comes when the truth finally arrives to answer a question you didn't know you'd been asking. She thought of Liam's first birthday party, how she scraped together enough for a chocolate cake and balloons from the dollar store. How she stayed up all night sewing a superhero costume he'd wanted for Halloween. How she worked double shifts to afford his braces. How she held him when he had night terrors, stayed silent. When he slammed doors, forgave him 1,000 times before he ever knew he needed forgiving. She had done all of that, and she had done it without knowing he wasn't hers by blood. But she had loved him like he was with every fiber of her being. And he had cast her aside, blood or not. The betrayal didn't sting the same anymore. Now it felt clean, like a cut that had finally scabbed over. There was no more illusion to protect, no more weight to carry. She looked down at the letter again, then folded it carefully and laid it on the kitchen table. Open, unhidden, unapologetic. This was her truth now, and somehow knowing it didn't diminish her. It clarified her. She hadn't lost a son. She had set herself free. The morning after she read the letter, Evelyn woke up to 27 unread messages. She didn't open a single one. The phone sat on the nightstand, buzzing every few minutes, like a mosquito that refused to die. Calls from Liam, texts from Sophie. A long, guilt-laced message from Sophie's mother. Even the wedding planner chimed in some veiled apology, mixed with passive confusion. This really could have been handled more professionally, Mrs. Carter. Evelyn laughed. Quietly, a soft breathy sound that surprised even her. Professionally. She had spent her entire life being professional. Graceful, composed. She had mastered the art of shrinking herself to fit every room. Liam needed her to disappear into the quiet mother, the silent funder, the reliable name on the check. But this silence, this was different. This wasn't weakness, it was power. She turned her phone face down and walked into the kitchen. The air smelled like morning coffee and toast, and the faint lemon from the dish soap. She opened the window, letting the breeze filter through the curtains. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. A dog barked 2 doors down. Someone watered their plants. A child's laughter rang out from across the street. Life continued, and so did she. She brewed a pot of coffee and drank it slowly, letting each sip settle deep in her chest. No rush. No anxiety spiraling in her lungs. No need to explain herself. The quiet in her home didn't feel empty anymore. It felt clean. She spent the afternoon tending her garden. She pulled weeds, trimmed the roses, repotted a succulent she'd neglected. The sun warmed her shoulders, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was bracing for impact. She felt steady, present whole. When she came back inside, the phone was still blinking. More messages. She didn't flinch. She didn't owe anyone a performance. This silence wasn't a void. It was a boundary, and the longer it lasted, the more she felt herself expanding into it. By evening, Liam's tone had shifted. His final voicemail was stiff, defensive. "You made a scene, Mom. Everyone's talking. I don't know what you were trying to prove, but you really embarrassed us. He still thought she had done this to them. Not for herself. Evelyn sat on the couch, tucked her legs beneath her, and stared at the muted television screen. Her own reflection faintly mirrored in the dark glass. She didn't look tired anymore, just resolved. She remembered a line from a book she read once, something about how silence isn't the absence of sound but the presence of space. A place to grow, to heal, to reimagine yourself outside the noise. She understood it now. Every time she didn't reply, she was choosing herself. Every time she let the phone ring, she was saying, "I exist beyond your convenience." She made dinner for one lemon chicken with thyme and roasted potatoes. She ate slowly, not because she was savoring the food, but because there was no one rushing her. No one to please, no one to perform for. Later that night, she lit a candle by the window and watched it flicker against the glass. The room was still. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the flame. She could have sent a message, could have unleashed every pain and betrayal into words sharp enough to slice through their justifications. But she didn't. Because the deepest power is not in what you say, it's in what you no longer feel compelled to explain. And Evelyn Carter. She was finally done explaining herself. The mall was quieter on weekdays. Evelyn preferred it that way. She walked past the department store perfume counters, the escalators, the kiosks pushing phone cases and overpriced essential oils. For the first time in years, she wasn't there to pick up a birthday gift for Liam or return a suit he never wore or look for sale items she didn't even need. She was shopping for herself. At first, she didn't know where to go. Her feet wandered until they led her to a small boutique tucked near the back of the mall. It smelled faintly of cedarwood and orange peel, and the music playing overhead was a slow, jazzy cover of a song she used to love. She ran her fingers along a rack of linen shirts, cool, flowing soft against her skin. One in particular caught her eye, a muted sage green with a wide collar and shell buttons. It wasn't something she'd normally wear, which was exactly why she tried it on. When she stepped in front of the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she felt it. Unburdened, unwatched, unapologetic. She bought the shirt and the earrings the clerk suggested, and a candle that smelled like bergamot and honey. She walked out of the store lighter like each item she carried peeled back another layer of herself. She'd long forgotten. On the way home, she stopped at a cafe she used to visit before Liam was born. It still had the same creaky wooden floors and chalkboard menu. She ordered a slice of lemon tart and a cup of strong black coffee. No cream, no sugar. Just the way she liked it. She sat by the window and let the sunlight warm her arms. There was no rush, no school pickup, no grocery list. Just her. Later that afternoon. Back in her living room, Evelyn turned on the stereo and scrolled through the old CDs she had packed away in a drawer. She found one scratched dusty of Van Morrison. She pressed play. Into the Mystic hummed through the speakers, and the melody wrapped around her like a long-lost friend. She danced. Not wildly, not for show. Just a slow swaying rhythm as she moved from room to room, letting the music lead her through the house she had kept tidy for everyone but herself. When the music stopped, she stood in front of the hallway bookshelf, the one with all the framed photos, Liam's kindergarten graduation, his prom, his first day at college, Christmas morning, school plays, birthday candles, a gallery of a life she had curated, loved, preserved. She looked at each frame, her hand lingering on the glass. Then, One by one, she took them down, not in anger, not to erase him, but to make room for herself. She wrapped the frames in soft towels and placed them gently in a box. Taped the lid, labeled it Memories, not obligations. The wall looked bare when she finished, but it didn't feel empty. It felt honest. She hung one new photo, just one. A picture of the ocean she had taken on a trip alone years ago, before life had swallowed her whole. The waves were dark and powerful, crashing against the shore. A reminder that she had always been bigger than her silence. That evening, Evelyn cooked dinner without thinking about Liam's preferences. No pasta with red sauce. No grilled chicken with no seasoning. Instead, she roasted salmon with garlic and dill, paired with asparagus and wild rice. She poured herself a glass of white wine and lit the candle from the boutique, and she ate in peace. No phone calls, no guilt, no need to be anything but exactly who she was. Evelyn Carter once. A mother, now something more. A woman rediscovering herself. One choice at a time. The table wasn't fancy. It was the same old wooden one Evelyn had once used to fold laundry and help Liam with long division homework. The legs still wobbled slightly, and one corner had a chip in the varnish from when she dropped a hot casserole dish years ago. But tonight it looked different. Tonight it was hers. A blue tablecloth with sunflowers danced across the surface. Sunlight still faint in its threads. Mismatched plates, cloth napkins folded like little fans. A single candle flickered in the center, its scent warm, faintly spiced like the holidays Evelyn used to dream of having. She hadn't set the table this way for anyone in years. But tonight wasn't about just anyone. It was for the people who had shown up not out of duty but out of love. Claire arrived first. She wore a simple linen dress and carried a bottle of red wine in one hand and a homemade peach cobbler in the other. "You look amazing, Maggie," she said with a grin, pulling Evelyn into a hug that lasted just a moment longer than it needed to. Next came Mr. Henderson, her next-door neighbor, with his usual twinkle-eyed smile and a bouquet of daisies he liberated from his own garden. "Thought your table needed some color," he said, shrugging. "You've got enough grace, figured I'd bring the bloom." Then Dana walked in. Bookstore manager, Sunday morning confidant, the woman who always remembered Evelyn's favorite author without having to ask. She carried a stack of books tied with twine and a jar of homemade pesto. "Just a little something for your shelf and your soul," she winked. By 6 o'clock the table was full. So were the chairs and the room. And Evelyn's heart. They passed dishes back and forth, roast chicken with rosemary lemon, roasted carrots, garlic bread still warm from the oven, wine flowed freely, as did the laughter. Claire told a story about a disastrous online date with a man who brought his taxidermy raccoon to dinner. Mr. Henderson confessed to once accidentally locking himself out of his house in nothing but his underwear and a strategically held newspaper. Dana claimed she had a running bet with herself to see how many pens she could accidentally steal from the post office before someone noticed. And Evelyn. She laughed. Not politely, not in passing. She laughed until her ribs ached, until her eyes crinkled, until the air felt new in her lungs. At one point, someone asked about her favorite dessert. For the first time in years, she didn't say Liam's favorite. She said her own. "Lemon tart," she answered confidently. "Tangy, not too sweet, like truth in pastry form." They toasted to that. There were no speeches. No formalities, just small kindnesses and meaningful glances. People asking how are you and waiting for the real answer. She caught herself watching them between courses. The way Claire leaned in when someone spoke how Mr. Henderson refilled everyone's glass without being asked, how Dina kept reaching over to squeeze Evelyn's hand when she smiled too quietly. This was family, not the one you're born into, the one you build, the one you choose. Toward the end of the evening, as the last crumbs were wiped from plates and the candle had melted halfway down, Claire raised her glass once more. To Evelyn, she said, her voice warm and certain, "For reminding us that it's never too late to take your seat at the head of your own table." The others lifted their glasses. So did Evelyn. This time her hands didn't shake. She didn't look toward a kitchen door or wait for permission. She simply smiled and said, "To being seen." And for the first time in a long time, she truly was. The knock came just after noon, not loud, not urgent, just steady like he knew she was home and wasn't going to leave until she opened the door. Evelyn stood in the hallway barefoot, her tea cooling on the kitchen counter behind her. Through the frosted glass, she saw the silhouette. Shoulders slightly hunched, hands in pockets. Liam. She opened the door slowly. He looked the same, but smaller somehow. Or maybe she was just seeing clearly for the first time. He wore a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans. His eyes were tired. The confident, polished man from the wedding had evaporated. What stood before her now was the boy she had raised, and the stranger he had become. "Hi, Mom," he said. She didn't reply, just stepped aside. He hesitated before walking past her into the living room. His eyes darted toward the mantel. The photos were gone. Every one of them. He didn't say anything. Just sat in the armchair, the one with the embroidered cushion she'd made for him when he left for college. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally he exhaled sharply like he'd been holding his breath since he arrived. "I didn't come here to fight?" Evelyn nodded once. "Good." He rubbed the back of his neck eyes on the floor. I don't understand what happened. One minute, everything was fine, and the next you were canceling things, posting checks online. Everyone's confused. Sophie's upset. Her parents are embarrassed. People are talking. He looked up, expecting some kind of reaction. But Evelyn's face was unreadable. "What were you trying to prove?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the hallway closet and returned with a simple cardboard box. She set it on the coffee table between them. "What's this? Receipts?" she said. "Invoices, contracts. Everything from the last 12 months. Venue deposits, dress fittings, photographer fees, even the custom cocktail napkins." Sophie wanted. His eyes skimmed the top page, but he didn't touch it. Then she pulled out a second envelope, handed it to him. Michael's letter, she didn't explain. She didn't need to. He opened it, read it slowly. His fingers tightened around the paper as he reached the final line. His mouth parted, but no sound came out. When he finally looked at her, his face was pale. "You knew," he said quietly. "I do now. And you're mad. Because I'm not your biological son." She shook her head. "I'm not mad because of blood. Liam, I'm angry because I gave you everything I had. And when the moment came for you to honor that, for you to say, 'This woman made me,' you stayed silent." His eyes dropped. She leaned forward, voice steady. "You let them put me behind a swinging door. You let them erase me from the story, and you didn't even flinch." "It wasn't like that," he whispered. "Sophie said she thought it would look better for the photos. I didn't think it would hurt you." Evelyn laughed. "Soft but cold, you didn't think?" She picked up one of the empty frames from the side table, the one that used to hold a photo of his kindergarten graduation. "You had a gap-toothed smile and marker on your shirt. You ran off the stage and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack." She set the frame face down. "I'm done holding on to versions of you that no longer exist." Liam blinked hard. "Mom." "No," she said, cutting him off gently. "I'm not your backdrop anymore. I'm not your bank. I'm not your afterthought." He clenched his jaw, nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, barely audible. She stood, walked him to the door. At the threshold, he looked back, searching for softness, for the possibility that maybe someday the door would reopen. "You always said I was your whole world?" he said. She met his gaze. "You were," she replied. "And now, I'm finally mine." She closed the door. And this time, she didn't look back. Evelyn stood in the hallway, phone in hand. Liam's name sat at the top of her contact list, the way it always had anchored there like a lighthouse she once steered every part of her life around. Birthdays, check-ins, late-night messages, years of just wanted to say hi and do you need anything and I'm proud of you. But now looking at it, she felt nothing. No ache, no guilt, no longing, just quiet. She didn't delete his number. She simply erased the name. Let the digits float freely, anonymous, a string of numbers no longer tethered to her identity. It was the first time in 30 years she hadn't carried him like a piece of herself. And it was freeing. The next morning, Evelyn signed up for a painting class at the community center. It had been decades since she picked up a brush. The last time was in college before she dropped out to work full-time and pay for Michael's dental school dreams. Before Liam. Before the rent. Before life taught her that art didn't pay the bills. Now, standing before an easel, she felt the flutter of something unfamiliar. Curiosity. Her hands moved tentatively at first, smudging blues and yellows into something soft and shapeless. But it didn't matter. For the first time in years, the result wasn't the point. Creating something just because she wanted to, that was the point. On Thursdays, she joined a gentle yoga class taught by a woman named Marisol, who wore flowing pants and spoke in metaphors about breath and grief and groundedness. Evelyn couldn't quite fold the way the others did, and her knees cracked when she moved too fast. But she didn't care. Each stretch felt like forgiveness. She went to the bookstore on Sundays and didn't head straight for the parenting or self-help shelves. Instead, she browsed poetry, travel memoirs, fiction by authors she'd never heard of. She let herself get lost in sentences that had nothing to do with sacrifice or fixing anyone else. She made a list, places I might go. It read Santa Fe in the fall, Paris in the spring, Maine just to see the lighthouses, a train ride through the Rockies, anywhere with ocean and silence. She didn't know when or how, but for the first time she believed she could. Not because someone else needed her there, but because she wanted to go. Every day she learned something new about herself. That she liked dark chocolate more than milk. That she hated red wine but loved Riesling. That she preferred linen sheets over cotton and liked falling asleep to the sound of audiobooks. She lit candles at breakfast, played music while folding laundry, bought fresh flowers from the market not to impress anyone, but because they made the kitchen smell like joy. Little by little, she stopped asking what the world needed from her and started asking what she needed from herself. Evelyn didn't reinvent her life overnight, she just reclaimed it. One breath, one brushstroke, one choice at a time. The lights were low and golden, strung across the backyard like fireflies caught in mid-laughter. The table, long and simple, was set under a sky slowly melting into twilight. It was mismatched and imperfect, wooden chairs of all sizes, ceramic plates chipped at the edges, glassware that clinked out of rhythm. But the laughter, that was perfect. Claire was telling a story about her first trip to New York, complete with a missed subway and a wrong hotel room. Mr. Henderson was mid-toast reminiscing about a childhood prank involving water balloons and the town mayor. Dina had just snorted wine through her nose from laughing too hard. And Evelyn was glowing. Not in the polished, rehearsed way of bridal spotlights and posed photographs, but in the way a fire glows once it's learned. It doesn't need to burn quietly anymore. She wore her linen blouse, the sage green one she had bought just for herself, and simple gold earrings. Her silver-streaked hair was tied back loosely. No Spanx, no mascara, no smile forced into politeness, just her real present. Scene. The night had been filled with second helpings and clinking forks. Wine poured without asking, stories passed around like bread. There were no speeches planned, no timeline, no expectations, only community, only presence. And then somewhere between dessert and that final glass of wine, Claire raised her glass. "I think," she said, looking around the table, "we should toast." Everyone turned to her, smiling. "To what?" Dina asked. Claire didn't answer. She turned to Evelyn. "You choose?" Evelyn looked down at her hands. A moment passed, then she rose. The chairs creaked, the air shifted, A hush gentle but full settled over the table like dust before a storm. She lifted her glass not high, not dramatically, but firmly, like a woman who had carried a world and now chose to carry herself, to the women she began. Voice clear and calm who built the house, but were told to sit in the kitchen. A beat. Silence. Every pair of eyes was on her. She continued. To the ones who stayed up late, sewing costumes and gluing science fair volcanoes, to the ones who worked double shifts so someone else could chase their dream, to the women who gave quietly endlessly without applause until they disappeared into the background of the very lives they held together. A pause. She swallowed. We were told to be small, to be grateful for scraps, to pay for the feast, but sit behind the door. Her eyes shimmered, but her voice never shook. Never again. Someone exhaled. Someone else whispered. Yes. Evelyn smiled softly. Tonight we take our seat, not at the corner of someone else's story, not behind the curtain or in the shadows. But here, at the head of the table we set with our own hands. She looked around at the faces surrounding her people not bound by blood but by choice, by love, by presence. To being seen, she said, to choosing ourselves, and to never letting anyone mistake our kindness for absence again. She raised her glass a little higher this time. Cheers! Glasses clinked. Hands reached across the table. Laughter resumed, but something in the air had shifted. It wasn't just dinner anymore. It was a declaration, a communion. Later that night, Evelyn sat on the porch alone, a soft blanket over her shoulders. The stars blinked above her quiet witnesses to the woman she had become. The kitchen light still glowed inside. But she wasn't back there anymore. She was right here, at the table where she had always belonged. The morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor in warm ribbons of gold. The air was quiet save for the soft chirping of sparrows outside the window and the low hum of the coffee maker. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm mug and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool against her skin, the kind of cool that woke her gently, not urgently. She took a deep breath and it filled her, not just with oxygen, but with a stillness she hadn't known in years. The roses were in bloom, full and unapologetic, vibrant reds, soft blush pinks, even a few wild oranges she hadn't expected. She had planted them 2 summers ago with no guarantee they'd survive. The soil had been dry, the weather unpredictable, but here they were, alive, thriving. So was she. She walked barefoot onto the grass, coffee in hand, letting the dew kiss her toes. The world moved slowly out here. No pings, no buzzing, no need to explain herself. The house behind her stood quiet, steady, no longer a place of waiting, but of choosing. She didn't check her phone. She knew there were still messages. Maybe even one last attempt from Liam. A final defense. A hollow apology, an echo of what had been. But she didn't need to read it. She didn't need to hear him say sorry. Not because she had forgiven him, maybe she hadn't, but because she no longer required his validation to breathe, to smile, to live. He had been her world. And now she was hers. Evelyn sat in the Adirondack chair facing the garden, tucked her legs beneath her, and took a long sip of her coffee. A soft breeze carried the scent of rosemary from the planter beside her. The roses swayed almost as if bowing in the breeze. The silence wasn't lonely. It was whole. Later today she might paint or read or plan that trip to Santa Fe she'd written at the top of her maybe list. Or she might do nothing at all. And that too would be enough. Because the life she had built from broken pieces, the life she'd once given away in service to others, now sat firmly in her hands. Quiet, beautiful, completely hers. There was no revenge in her heart. No bitterness. Only clarity, only peace, only this truth that the woman once seated behind the swinging kitchen door had found her way not just to the table, but to the sun, and she had no intention of ever dimming again.